We want to thank Next Level Marketing for being our opening sponsor on the podcast. If you have social media that you use for marketing, you need to check out Next Level Marketing and follow them on Facebook. You can also reach them at Gary Bontrager Consulting on our website, www.garybontrager.com. They will do a free audit for you and check out what your social media, how it's performing, what loopholes there are, and how you can tighten it up and be more effective with your marketing. They will help put strategies together to use organic growth to maximize the dollars that you do spend. We appreciate them being an associate sponsor with us on this Mindset Growth podcast and enjoy what they do for us. This is a company that we work with and we endorse, and we don't take that lightly. I want to welcome you to another episode of Mindset Growth Podcast. My name is Gary Bontrager, your host. I have Heather, my co-host, with me today. Interestingly enough, we have a guest that I'm excited to learn a lot more about. I've not had an opportunity to really visit before this. However, comes with very high regard from one of our previous guests.
Mr. Randy Chaffee.
Right. And he said this gentleman is what we call the closer. So I am excited to share this episode with our listeners, and maybe they can gain some insights and some things that will help them in their careers and in their businesses. So without any further ado, I want to welcome Ben Gay III, and I believe you have authored a book as well. I'll let you introduce yourself there a little bit and talk about that.
Super. My name is Ben Gay III. As you just heard, the book Gary was talking about is The Closer. There's a whole series, but this is the first and most famous book, The Closers, what we now call Part 1. It was just The Closers when we first published it. Sold, the average book that comes out sells 500 in its lifetime. And that includes giving books away to your friends, neighbors, and relatives. The Closers Part 1 had sold 10.5 million copies when we quit counting 27 years ago, and continues on doing very well. So the Closers series, if you take that book and the series, is the best-selling, most popular, most powerful book on selling and closing ever written.
Excellent.
It's rough. It's selling. Part 1 is rough in that it's the kicks, the blocks, and the punches of selling the way it really is, not the way sometimes we wish it was.
Right.
And the Closers Part 2 picks up where that leaves off and shows you what sophisticated people really do with that information. I've been in selling since I don't remember a time when I wasn't in selling. I won a citywide contest selling Krispy Kreme donuts in Atlanta, won a bright red Columbia bicycle.
How old were you when you did that?
10.
And was that for like a school project?
Probably. What it really was, when you see somebody broadcasting from Atlanta, their backdrop, as you're facing the screen off to the left, is always the gold dome of the state capitol. We raised money to bring that gold down from Dahlonega, Georgia, where the East Coast gold rush took place, and turn it into gold leaf and coat the Capitol. I suspect I have a little bitty square somewhere on that dome that's mine, because they had to raise millions of dollars to do it. But that was but I was selling. The neighbors in the neighborhood used to say that they hated to see me coming, especially if I was dragging a little wagon, because I was selling saltwater taffy or Christmas cards or something. And the Krispy Kreme donut one was the one that sort of hooked me, because I'd never been paid for any of that other stuff.
Right.
It was, school projects.
Right.
And suddenly I had a direct reward for what I did. And I thought, oh, that's pretty neat. Mm-hmm. So did all the things you're supposed to do, muddled along in high school, graduated by the skin of my teeth, went to college, was elected president of my freshman class, which is wonderful, but I never got the enjoyment of being inaugurated, because the inauguration was 3 weeks after school started, and I, by that time, had dropped out. I wanted to go make a living doing something. And so dropped out and did a few little things here and there. Was a buyer at Macy's and so on. But September 15th, 1965, a Wednesday, I picked up the Atlanta Journal-Constitution looking for a way to make more money. I was putting my first wife, she's since passed away, through nursing school on not a whole lot of money. And I couldn't find anything in the help. One of the things I was qualified to do. I couldn't type back then. Boys didn't take typing class. That's where girls went. And so what few I knew how to mow lawns. I'd had a pretty successful lawn mowing business, employed about 20, 25 kids on a commission basis. But other than mowing lawns, which I didn't want to do, I couldn't qualify for anything. So I started to throw the newspaper in the garbage can in disgust when I saw business opportunities. I didn't know what that meant, but I thought, well, that's interesting. So I read down, first ad said, if you know anything about marketing plans and want to make more money, dial this number. I wanted to make more money. I didn't know what a marketing plan was, but I thought we could figure that out as we went along.
Right.
Went in a phone booth, dialed the number. And when I dialed, and I mean dialed,
right,
in those days.
I remember that.
Yeah, it would, and it always sounds like you're calling from inside a trash can. I dialed the number, and I didn't realize I was dialing in the launch code. From that moment on, my life would never be the same. Gentleman answered the phone. I began interviewing him to see if he was worthy of hiring me. And about 4 or 5 minutes into that nonsense, he said, Mr. Gay, I'm not the man standing in a phone booth. Where are you? And I said, well, I'm on Peachtree Street. Of course, that's any street in Atlanta. And he said, oh, good. You're a couple of blocks from my office. Be standing in front of my desk in 10 minutes or never dial this number again. And he hung up. So my running buddy, we weren't business partners yet, came around. He was calling on stores with me. And I said, quick, 1447 West Peachtree Street. And he said, what's going on? I said, we're going to be rich. My theory was if you had enough money to run an ad in the paper, I didn't know what they cost, but to run an ad in the paper and then hang up on the people who called you, you were probably doing pretty well. So with a minute or two to spare, I skidded in front of the receptionist's desk. And I said, hi, I'm Ben Gay. And she said, oh, we've been expecting you. And from behind me, I heard someone laugh. Well, with a name like Ben Gay, I'm sort of used to that.
Right.
So I turned around to whoever that was. And I said, hi, I'm Ben Gay. What's your name? He said, Zig Ziglar. And I said, with a name like Zig Ziglar, you're laughing at Ben Gay? You got to be kidding me. Well, he'd answered the same ad I'd answered. And there were only, Jimmy Rucker was with me.
Right.
So there were 3 humans, but there were 2 buying units. The only 2 that answered the ad were Ben Gay and Zig Ziglar.
Right.
We went on to become dear friends, both joined the same business in that meeting. It was Holiday Magic Cosmetics, a multi-level marketing company, which had just started less than a year before. But by the time I left it a few years later, we were doing $1 million a day, adjusted for inflation. That's $3.5 billion. And because of a sales contest I had won, I won the mystery prize. Turned out mystery prize was president of the company.
Oh, wow.
Second prize was Rolls Royce. Zig got that. The guy who brought us in the business won the Lincoln. And there might have been a Thunderbird or something like that after that. And then it got into the steak knives. But on rough days, Zig would call. He was mildly bitter that I had beaten him. And he'd be talking about his problems. And I'm talking about the problems of starting to run with a high school education. An international company, Holiday Magic at the time, quickly became the largest MLM direct sales company on the planet. And I didn't know how to balance my own checkbook. So with, gift of gab and fancy tap dancing, I had risen to the top. So when Zig called me about something, I was usually in the call with Zig. Here's the deal. You bring me the keys to the Rolls Royce, and I will give you the keys to the front door. And Zig would always say, oh, no, you won fair and square. So although I'd done some speaking before that got me in front of groups,
right,
giving talks and so on. So that turned me officially into a public speaker. Since that time, I've given 5,000 plus paid speeches, seminars,
Right.
talked to about 2.5 million people in person, face to face. And of course, I can speak to that many a week now
Right.
with Zoom and so on. But
Right.
that was flying around, seeing them one on one. And as I said, when I dialed the number in the phone booth, everything changed. I've traveled all over the world, met kings and queens and princes and some of the most powerful people on the planet, all because I was trying to put my wife through nursing school and was desperate.
Amazing things happen from small steps.
Well, and the interesting thing is there's always got to be a why. I mean, that's just any person to find success, you've got to have a why. And it's interesting how your why was actually serving somebody else, which is incredible in itself. I have a lot of questions just with what you shared, but I'm going to go to something that we ask all of our guests because I believe successful people do a lot of the same things and do a lot of this for sure. And that is, do you have a morning routine?
Absolutely. I've got a routine for everything.
Right. Well, I figured you did if you wrote a book, the book that you have and the books you've written, but would you share that with us? I want people that are listening to this to maybe get a glimpse of, because it's a lot more. I mean, certainly you've changed over the years from the day you were in the phone booth and you ran down the street, but there's routines and habits and patterns. And there's a difference between doing that and the person that gets up grumpy, packs a lunchbox, and is still grumpy when they get back home. There's a big difference. And I want them
grumpy all day long.
Right. And I just but I tried to share that because I'd like for you to share that because I want people to understand successful people like yourself do different things than the average people.
Well, Dr. Napoleon Hill was my personal mentor. I was his last mentee.
Okay.
And one of the few, he didn't like doing that, but we paid him enough to mentor me. Everybody has a price. His was $50,000 a year in 1967. So it's about $500,000 a year now.
Certainly.
So he became my friend and buddy, but he put me on a system. I call it the Daily Success System, which I'm still on. In fact, you are the 9th item on today's Daily Success System.
Excellent.
Written in and highlighted in yellow.
Excellent.
So he encouraged me to systemize everything. My morning routine, I almost don't know how to set my alarm. I wake up at 4:30. Right. 4:29 or 4:31, but I wake up at 4:30. Mm-hmm. As soon as I am consciously aware that I'm awake, that takes a split second or two, I say, Jesus, thank you so much for getting us. And I would make sure I hear Gigi breathing next to me. Thank you so much for getting us to this day. And then I go into my morning prayer. And I can picture Jesus going, oh, no, it's him again. Because mine is long and detailed and broken into segments. It's systematized. So I do that. And by then I get up and turn on the coffee. I'm greeted by 2 cats who moved into our house after I said they couldn't be in the house. They'd have to eat dry food on the back deck. That hasn't worked out well. I'm greeted by 2 cats who have a certain food that they demand in the morning. I've already turned on the coffee. I bring Gigi hers, and we chat for a few moments. And I generally watch the news. I like to make sure World War III hasn't broken out during the night. Once I'm assured that that's good, I have my phone on by 5 at the latest. And I begin not answering things unless it's really important, but making sure that there's nothing really important I ought to answer there. Really getting to work waits till I get to the office and start through that. Read the paper if there is one. We live in a small town. It only comes 3 times a week. And it's fading away. I keep waiting for the one that says this is the last edition.
Right.
It's the oldest newspaper west of the Mississippi River. It was founded in the gold rush. I live in Placerville, California, where gold was discovered.
Okay.
Started the rush. And we're still selling gold pans to the tourists. all these years later. That's what they did during the gold rush. Very few people really made any money, but they made a lot of money
Right.
selling Levi's and gold pants.
Right.
Panners.
No, that's a huge part of our fabric of our culture, really, in this country, was that whole process. I was just curious a little bit of what that was, because I know that we have a broad variety of listeners, and it's just almost always, Heather, we've got people that they've got a morning routine.
Unless they have small children, that's about the only exception.
Those sometimes children will certainly dictate your schedules. Yep. So those are the ones that usually are most lenient. One other thing we're going to jump in and do, and then get back into some questions. We like to do something different than a lot of podcasts do, and that is just some rapid fire questions. And so we have a list of like 30 some questions, and we'll pull 3 out of those. And it's just kind of something that you didn't see coming, but we like just a quick, short answer on it. And sometimes it generates a discussion or triggers something interesting about a guest that can be very helpful for one of our listeners. So I'll let you take the first one, Heather.
Okay. Which American founding father or historical figure would you like to spend the day with?
Abraham Lincoln.
Good answer.
He's not technically a founding father, but it was far
historical
enough back
figure.
where,
historical figure.
Abraham Lincoln, and the questions would be along the lines of, how did you do it?
Right.
I mean, he was the most oppressed president in our history.
Right. No, I agree with you. That would be my first quick choice right there.
That'd be a long conversation too. long answer to that question, right. I'm sure.
The next one. What's your favorite hobby?
I don't really have a hobby. I used to be a golfer, and I got so good that my father, who I was working for, suggested that I either turn professional or get serious about business. I made the mistake of beating him one day. And, he played 3 times a week because he'd earned the right.
Right.
I was playing 5 times a week, unbeknownst to him.
Oh.
So it was golf. But my hobby now is I love what I do. I can't wait to wake up in the morning and talk to the first person, whoever it is, go out to dinner and make 15 new surface friends, kid with people, and so on. So that's sort of become my hobby. I don't race dirt bikes anymore, which I used to do.
Okay.
I've found that it's better to have the use of your hands and arms and all, so you can make a living.
I share that too. I did that for a period of time till it hurt more than I wanted it to.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you get the next one.
Okay. Do you prefer summer or winter?
I prefer neither. I'm a 70. I like spring and fall. You don't like
hot or cold, huh?
Yeah, I'm a 72 degree person. 72 degrees, I don't feel heat or cold. It's perfectly neutral. So if we were ever to move, we won't. Gigi's family's been here 100 years, and I'm not ever going to pull her out of here, and I've grown to love the little town. But if we did move, it would be to a place where the average temperature year-round is 72 degrees. I just like to not be bothered by weather. I don't want to wake up, it snowed. How are we going to get the car out?
Iowa would not be the state for you then.
Yeah. No. Well, I lived in Toronto for a while. And my first talk, I landed in the first blizzard of the year. And my first address to the audience was, do you know that you don't have to live here?
We ask ourselves that all the time. Why do I live in a state where the wind freezes my face?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's get back. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't like weather being an issue in my life.
Right.
I'm not a farmer. I'm not an outdoors person. So just leave me alone. And 72 degrees does that.
Right. It can be that way in the house, out of the house. Everything's just wonderful.
Exactly.
So I want to get back into the sales. I mean, obviously you've had massive success. You've written books about it. You speak about it. And the question really, I mean, you've somewhat answered how you got into it, but I'm going to believe that you didn't even understand quite what you were doing at that point. And when you finally got into that company that day, like at what point did you understand that this is sales, and sales is where I'm going to find the success in life. How was that transition? Because you said you didn't really do any college. You just went from high school.
I'm the president of the freshman class at Georgia State University.
For 3 weeks. So I guess, how did that, like, what was that process though? That day happened, and I know you fast forwarded that, Zig was there, and clearly the both of you were hired on. And I guess my curiosity is, when did you understand the dynamics of sales? When did you start to create what program you were using? Things like that.
Well, I was born into a family of salespeople.
Okay.
My mother, father owned their own business, and therefore we're salespeople.
Okay.
Dad especially. All of my aunts and uncles were salespeople and or owned their own business. And I was raised at East Lake Country Club, Bobby Jones' home course, 2 blocks out the front gate. So everybody I knew was successful, or at least appeared successful.
Right.
I walked around with the chairman of the board of Coca-Cola, whoever it was at the time, because membership there came with it. So my comfort zone, Jim Newman, with respect to Jim Newman, my old friend who coined that term, my comfort zone was set high. I was used to living a nice life. We always had nice cars, luxury cars, belonged to the club. If we ate in, it was by choice. It wasn't by budgetary need,
Right.
So, but then when I got married, my father took me aside and said, "Congratulations, I'm happy you're married, and we're going to miss you." In other words, the good times are over. You now make money and support your wife and go about your business. Well, I didn't know anything, but this isn't a deep thought process at the time. It's looking back.
Right.
I didn't know anything but owning your own business and selling. That was sort of it. And then my adventure into the help wanted thing proved it. There was nothing in there I was qualified. There was no point even dialing the phone numbers. There was nothing in there I was qualified to do. I remember getting discouraged when I got to the P's, psychologist. I just really didn't think a high school graduate should call that number. And so then it became poverty and desperation. How do I get my wife through nursing school and make her a productive member of the family? That crossed my mind too. If she were a nurse, she'd be contributing to this. So I was really driven into it by that. Then I joined Holiday Magic Cosmetics, and suddenly I was around people who were making a lot of money. I went from all this stuff you have to adjust for inflation. It wasn't really as bad as it sounds now, but I was making $100 a week, $1,000 a week now, and hanging out with people who were making $10,000 a month and driving big Lincolns and so on. So I thought, there's something going on here I don't understand. And the first 6 months we were in the business, we didn't make a dime, not a penny. Nothing changed hands. I guess I didn't even ask my mother to buy some cosmetics. Literally not a dime. But I religiously went to the opportunity meetings 5-6 nights a week. And one night I walked in, and my sponsor, Bill Dempsey, called me over. He said, "Mr. Gay, I'd like to speak to you." And I said, "Yes." And by now we had $5,000 in borrowed money sunk into this, $50,000 today. And he says, "I don't want you coming to the meetings anymore." And I said, "Well, what do I do instead?" He says, "I don't know or care. I just don't want you coming to the meetings anymore." I said, "Why?" He said, "Do you remember the scripts I gave you the day you joined?" He gave me a record, which is still here. He said, "You're young, you're going to need help. The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale." He went, "This is the record." And Earl wound up being the voice of Holiday Magic. I hired him to do that. And then he gave me an old beat up copy of Think and Grow Rich. He said, "Read this." And then he gave me some scripts, memorize these. He said, "I hope you listened to the record. I hope you read the book. But I know you didn't read the scripts. And you've been coming here 5-6 nights a week with nobody in tow because you haven't learned the script about how to invite people to a meeting."
Right.
And then other people see you here every night and they think you're doing well, probably augmented by lying and exaggerating on my part. They think you're doing well. So when they can't close their prospect, they follow the system. They raise their hand and you go over to help, but you haven't learned the closing script. So you not only didn't bring anybody, you blew theirs off.
Right.
And then I can't put you at the front of the room because I assure you, you don't know that script. That was 47 minutes word for word. And I know you don't know that script. So really, the problem is you become sort of depressing. I had never heard depressing and Ben Gay in the same sentence in my life. I was voted wittiest senior year in high school, but that didn't come with straight A's. It just came with wittiest.
Right.
I was so witty, I got thrown out of 2 high schools before I graduated on my 3rd attempt. So I said, well, what do I do? Not pursuing this business isn't one of my options. He said, well, here's what I'll do. I brought you some new scripts, same ones I gave you before 6 months ago. But go home, memorize these, and when you can stand in front of my desk and do all of them word for word, I'll let you come back to the meetings. So 10 days later, I'm standing in front of his desk, went through all the scripts, all the closes, everything. I said, what do I do now? He said, here's an idea. Why don't you take the come to the meeting script and go out and talk to some people that you don't know. You probably worn out everybody you know. Go talk to some people you don't know and bring them to the meeting. And when you get them there, you'll know what to say. I said, oh, good idea. A few nights later, walk in with my first 5 prospects. They all bought the biggest package, thanks to the guy who gave the meeting and the fact I knew the scripts. They all bought the biggest package they could do on their first visit. There was a couple of steps before you got to the top where you had to do something else. And I made more money that night in about 20 minutes after the meeting ended than I'd made in any year in my life.
So that was a life-changing moment.
It really
for you,
was.
a watershed
that
moment.
literally moment. I can remember turning to one of them and saying, which position best suits your needs? He said, I'd like to be a master distributor, and pointed to the $2,500 figure. I said, oh, okay, good. Will that be cash or I don't know cash or check? I guess credit cards weren't all around at that time. And he said, well, check. And he pulled out his checkbook and said, who do I make it out to? And I told him, and my voice must have been quivering. And then the second guy did it, and the third guy did it, fourth guy, and I say guy, men, women, couples, a lot of them.
Right.
And I think the 5th person needed to go talk to his banker or something, make financial arrangements. But in result, 5 people, 100% closing rate, and made more money in about my 20 minutes than I'd made in a year in my life. So it was like magic. You say this, it was a well-crafted script, and they say yes and hand you a check. My goodness, I didn't know that.
That's interesting that you even say that. And I hope anybody listening that's in sales, I see a lot of young sales folks that struggle with closing. And I think often they're afraid to even just ask because they're trying to maybe protect. There's 2 things. One, I feel like they're afraid to protect, or they're trying to protect themselves from rejection.
Right.
And 2, from what I'm hearing you say, you just didn't really even have the wherewithal at that point to know to ask for the sale or to set yourself up to be in a position to ask.
Prior to learning the script, which had built into it, which position best suits your needs. Right. They had 4 choices. I don't think I'd ever asked for anything. I hadn't sold. Try and get this through your head. I had not collected a dime until that night in 6 months. Not a tube of lipstick, nothing. It was like I hadn't joined, except we were out $5,000 at that point. So it was, and I think sometimes the first close that you do is the most important one you'll ever make, or that you do successfully.
Right.
Because I remember when I said, which position best suits your need, and he pointed to master distributor and $2,500, I thought, that's magical.
Right.
I just asked him, and he said yes, and he's writing a check. That's astounding.
Right.
And that was the breakthrough, because it was fear of the unknown, fear of rejection, fear of God knows what he's going to say or do or whatever, humiliation. And when it worked, I was off and running. When we left the meeting that night, probably ended at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, Rucker says, do you want to do anything? And I said, well, what I want to do, we can't do. I want to go recruit some more people right now.
Right.
And let's get it early in the morning, because I saw if you do this and if you do this and so on, it works out.
We want to thank Gary Bontrager Consulting for being a sponsor on the Mindset Growth Podcast. There's a variety of services they offer. They have human resources for one. They have a sales program. They also work with the financials, whether you need to help set up your QuickBooks or go with a high-level person that can help you do benchmarking, budgeting, and the likewise. They also do a lot of leadership training, whether you're the business owner, manager, or are just leaders in departments. They can tailor those packages for you. Reach out to them for a free consult, and they will see what your needs are and offer different opportunities for you to put in motion to take your business to the next level. They have been successful over the past few years in helping organizations not only grow, but grow as much as 200%, 300%, and 400% in a 12-month period. Certainly, they understand it takes a strong foundation, and there are years where there may be no growth leading up to this as they put the right pieces in place. Reach out to them at www.garybontrager.com. You can reach out to them on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter and get the free advice that they offer, and that may be just what you need to set you on a different path to lead you forward and be successful in your business and your life. We appreciate them supporting us.
So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but starting out, what were your biggest struggles and how did you overcome those?
I didn't know it at the time. I mean, it wasn't a big thing to me. A lot of what I talk about today is hindsight, looking back.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm by nature, systems have saved me from this. By nature, I'm a procrastinator. Mm-hmm. By nature, I'm physically lazy. I got I set up a commission lawn mowing business because I mowed 2 lawns personally in Atlanta in the growing season, hot and muggy, and said, that's it. I'm done. It was fun mowing lawns, but I'm not going to do that anymore. And I went home, put the lawnmower away, and my father said, what are you doing? We were going to mow lawns. I said, well, I'm not doing that. There must be a better way. I'll rob banks, and at least they're air conditioned. And he taught me how to recruit friends. He said, your friends don't mow lawns because they're afraid to go ask for the order. You're not. So you knock on the doors, you tell them that you will mow their lawn, and there's no set price. They can pay you what they think it's worth afterwards. And I said, what if they say nothing afterwards? He said, then you need to learn how to do a better job. But they won't. They will pay you more than you would have thought. Then you take the money you get and you split it with the person who did the work, and you forget in the work, and you inspect the job and collect the money. I said, well, they're not going to work for half of it. And he said, yes, they will, because people are going to pay you more so that their half is bigger than it would have been if they'd gotten the job and kept all the money. And sure enough, he was right. I was making more money at 14 and 15 in the lawn mowing business than many of the adults in our neighborhood. And we lived in a nice area.
So what's interesting to me when you say that, and I think, I guess I want to verify what you're saying, and some of these questions I ask is because I want listeners to pick up lessons that you have learned. You had earlier said you really, had a great life and, money wasn't an issue until the day you got married and your father pulled you aside and said you're out on your own. And yet you were in a position where you made that much money as a 14 and 15-year-old, but your father really helped set and arrange all that.
Oh, sure.
And so it's interesting to me how once you were completely on your own, and I am not knocking it because I was a young man too, and we have just such a small retrospect. We can all look back and it's, we're all like, well, this would be easy. We just didn't know then what we know now. But, it didn't connect with you at that point to do what you're doing with the lawn mowing. with other things. But when you got into sales and followed that script, all of a sudden it was another life-changing moment, but you learned how to own it yourself rather than to rely on other people.
Yeah.
And by relying on yourself and learning those traits and habits and things yourself was incredible. I mean, you've helped, probably not only thousands, but maybe millions of people by doing all of that. So I'm just curious a little bit your thoughts on that. I mean, because you have children now, you say, what are some of those thought processes? How do you take somebody and transition the responsibility or the drive, the desire to try to go out and do what you did?
Well, if you had never had ice cream before and I was trying to motivate you to eat ice cream, I'd give you a bite of it.
Right.
Chocolate, vanilla, butter pecan, whatever. I'd give you a bite of it. And that's what I've tried to do in my sales training. One is simplify, would fit on some word that I can't think of, but simplify the process, because selling is the easiest thing in the world once you get over your little fear thing. I tell people, let's pick a quality product or service. If you don't do that, let's not continue with the conversation. That's a requirement. That's competitively priced. The market will usually take care of that, but it doesn't have to be the cheapest, just competitively priced so you can explain the price difference if there is one. And you spend your days talking to qualified people, qualified religiously, geographically, financially. Different products and services have different things that come along with them. But spend your time talking to qualified people. Figure out ways to get where they go. My brother-in-law is a great fisherman. I mean, really good. And I asked him one time, how do you catch so many trout where everybody's complaining that, the streams are empty? He said, well, first of all, I go where the trout are. He said, I just find that's helpful. You've never seen me fishing in your swimming pool.
Right.
And I said, no, I never have. He said, but 7 miles from here is the American River. If you know which rock to throw your fly at, it's loaded with fish. So I go where the fish are. So you go where the fish are, and then you become, and this is a project, to a lifelong project. You become a person of class, quality, and substance with the ability to tastefully project that you are. People buy, this is a term I coined 50 years ago and recently added to. People like to buy or do business with people they know, like, trust, ... and with whom they feel safe.
Exactly.
Your job is to become that person, hook it to a quality product that's competitively priced, and go talk to people who are qualified to buy it. If you do that, and I say use scripting, people say, well, I don't like scripts. I said, really? Have you ever been to the movies? Yeah. Who's your favorite actor? So and so. You've never heard him say a word that wasn't on script. Television. Do you watch television?
Right.
Yeah. Have you ever, even the news? What do you think they're doing? Making that up or reading off the teleprompter? It's called a script. So what we must do is figure out how to best present your product or service. If you work with a company that already has that, memorize it, and then learn to use what I call script chunks. Hal Holbrook, the old actor, recently passed away, did Mark Twain. He memorized 9.5 hours of Mark Twain material. But he says of the thousands of performances he gave, he never gave the same performance twice, because he walked on stage and he had a little short story that Twain liked, and he told that one. Same story every time without exception. And he knew the reaction he was supposed to get from that story. And based on the reaction the audience gave him, determined when he reached into the 9.5 hour vault of material he had, it determined which story he pulled out and told next. So those are the script chunks. If I was going through the closers with you, I would say describe part one verbatim, the way I've done it thousands of times before. Closers part two verbatim, the way I've done it before. Why you should hire me to do a seminar for your organization verbatim. But you could say, not all prospects have been to prospect school. You might say something that doesn't fit the next thing I was going to say. That's fine. Like Hal Holbrook, I got 9.5 hours worth of material.
Right.
I used to do, I don't do it anymore, but I did a 10-day seminar on how to sell and be successful. I had the 10-day version. I had the 5-day version. I had the 3-day, the 1-day, the half-day, and the 1 hour. And I just gave you moments ago the 5-minute version.
Right.
Same message. Pick a quality product that's competitively priced. Learn how to present it properly and start presenting it properly. And then my other little secret, especially in the beginning when I wasn't very good, was I'd outwork everybody. I came in early. I left late. I worked on weekends because I figured out rather quickly, especially for an inexperienced person, selling is nothing but numbers and closing skills.
Math equations.
If you call on 3 people a day and I call on 10 and your closing rate's 100% and mine is 50%, I'll still beat you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it's really that simple, but it's getting over that first thing of you got to go ask for the job. You got to get trained on the product. You got to do that. You got to learn the script chunks to draw out the proper thing at the proper time. And then the courage to do it. And one day it will. I asked J. Douglas Edwards, the great old sales trainer. I wrote a book for him after he died called Sales Closing Power. It's over there, but too far to reach. Sales Closing Power. I asked him one day, he was always talking about a closing instinct. You got to develop a closing instinct. And I said, Doug, what is a closing instinct? And how do I develop it? And he said, well, the instinct is knowing when to ask. And knowing when to ask is by closing too soon and too often. It's easier to get you to back off a little bit than to go forward a little bit. So, hi, my name's Ben Gay. You want to buy anything?
Well, that's a sudden one, and that's interesting though that you bring that up, because when I first got into, I shouldn't say first, there was one job I got into sales, I was at about a 20-25% close rate, and I still had great numbers, but then I developed this mentality of quantity, because I knew what it was, but as time progressed and my close rate went up, well, then your close volume, everything starts to change. And of course, today it's no different for you. You can start to read the client in the room and you can figure it out real quick. Your close rate is off the charts compared to 40 years ago, I'm sure. But it's interesting. And I think what you just said, and I want to break this down a little bit. I think so often when there's people that are new into sales, no matter what they're selling, when they're new at it, when they hear a no or feel rejection, they internalize it and take it personal. And the way I look at that, and I'm curious how your response would be to this, I look at a lot of it like they're just telling me, no, not right now. They're not telling me, no, it's you that's wrong. It's maybe they don't need the product right now. Maybe there's something different. And I'm going to come back to that. But how would you encourage young guys or women, men and women that are into sales, to not internalize that as personal rejection?
J. Douglas Edwards popularized this years ago and then went away, and Tom Hopkins brought it back. He was also a student of Doug, as was I. Tom was fond of saying, some will, some won't. Next.
And just keep moving with it.
You do it again and practice again and so on. My closing rate, not books, I could run it up to 100%. The phone rings. Hi, how are you?
Right.
How can I help you? I want to buy a book. That doesn't count.
Right.
But if you call, if you're thinking about bringing me in to do a seminar, or you're thinking about me becoming your copywriter, or you think about whatever, that can go either way. My closing rate with that type of sales, selling land in Arizona, et cetera, is 86%.
Okay.
So my confidence level is high to start with. I'm sort of usually, let's say I'm writing it out on a pad or on the phone or computer. I start writing up the order before you've bought. but I know you bought.
Right.
I listen to the buying signals.
There's
Right.
Which are, if you listen,
There's
are
cues in
loud
there.
and clear. I also listen to them because I want to know how they want to be sold. Because
Right.
they'll also tell you that if you're
Yes.
listening. So I listen to learn, not to respond.
Right.
So that's a big
Huge.
part of it. But getting them to take the first step, as Dr. Hill used to say to me, action, Ben, take action. Getting them to take the first step to have a victory. Back to the chocolate ice cream thing. Once they taste victory, they're hard to stop. A little correction here and there and
Right.
so on. Once you're up and running, if you're working for me, you won't hear anything from me other than you want to go to dinner, or can I buy you a drink, or
Right.
something like that. I don't try and train the people who are only trained, they're already trained. I might nudge you to get you back on track, or if I see something that, you have a 50% closing rate, would you like to have a 60%? Well, sure. Well, stop saying this. You're saying right in the middle of your sales presentation, you say this.
So go ahead. I was going to just ask another question that's always interesting to me as well, because it's back to something you said earlier about connecting with people, because people do business with people they like. I mean, it's just across the board.
Yep.
But there's, the saying out there, facts tell and stories sell. When you're doing a sales presentation, do you often then incorporate stories
during my script?
Into the script?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
And people say, I don't like to use scripts. Everyone who's been in selling over 30 days is on a script.
Right.
Because they tend to say the same thing over and over again. The difference is I try and sell them on using quality, tested, effective scripts.
Yes.
That's the difference. So, you insist on saying the same stupid thing over and over again. That's your script, but it's also the reason you're about to drop out of selling.
Right.
Let's change how. The Wall Street Journal has a letter. I'm sure each of you have gotten it. Both of you have gotten it. It starts out 25 years ago on a spring day, 2 people graduated from whatever, and it goes on. One of them is doing well, stuck in middle management at this company. And at the same company, the other guy who was with him in the graduating class is the CEO. And it goes on to imply that perhaps the difference was the CEO read the Wall Street Journal every day.
Right.
That letter is almost 50 years old since they've changed a word of it. It's their control piece. They've run many other letters. You've gotten other letters from them. But what they're trying to do when you get the other letter is to beat the spring day 25 years ago letter, and they've never been able to do it. And maybe break up the pattern a little bit.
Right.
Here's a letter that won't sell you, but if you're tired of the spring day, we'll get back to that next month. So on. So why I tell people, do you think they ought to keep mailing it or just make up a new letter every day? No, they ought to keep mailing that. Excellent. Now you understand scripting.
It's the same thing, repetitious.
It's the exact same thing. Yes.
So
yes.
Are your kids in sales as well?
Yes and no. My one was killed in a traffic accident.
I'm sorry.
So we have 4. It was years ago, but
Okay.
I just say, you might have heard me say I've had 4 sons, but one of them isn't living.
Okay.
The 2 others are. One is the guy who goes into hotels and changes the locks where you can't get in your room anymore. Some of us are old enough to remember a key.
Yes.
It always worked.
Yes.
He's the one that makes you wear a yellow hat and dance in circles in front of the lock while waving the card up.
Right.
I was checking into a hotel in Pasadena not too long ago and had to call my son in Chicago to ask him how to get in the room. He says, what does the card look like? And I told him, he says, okay, turn it upside down and wave it 3 times in front of the lock. I said, can't they just give me a key? Nope. Yeah, those days are over.
Right.
But he sells those jobs and then sells on the upgrade and so on.
Yes.
There's chains like Marriott where they do all the work for him.
Okay.
Yes, but it's variations. There's nobody in the family that goes out and does the old-fashioned eyeball to eyeball selling. And I don't have to, but when I write a script for you, I go test the script. Like the people in the neighborhood when I was growing up who hated to see me with a wagon. I have neighbors in this area hate to see me walking up their sidewalk because I'm there to test a script. They know what I'm doing. So I say, just raise your hand when I say something stupid. Raise your hand when I say something that you would object to or that would turn off the sale and so on. So I go test them. But most of my time is spent getting in position to have the right to ask for the order.
Right.
And here's my magic close.
That's key.
After 30, 40 minutes of getting in the right position, I say, Gary, based on what you've told me, here's what I suggest we do. Fill in the blank. Buy the car, don't buy the car, buy the roof, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I suggest we do. Fair enough? And 86% of the time, because I got in the right position, I'm selling a quality product or I wouldn't be there, 86% of the time they say, yeah, that's fair enough.
Right.
Or it smokes out their last question.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's fine too.
And that's very valid because a lot of times I always, when I get to the end, I go, do you have any more questions? Because I want to make sure I've answered them and I don't want to just talk and about things they don't even want to know about because as you can tell, there's personalities and you've got to meet where they're at. But the reason I asked you about your children, my youngest daughter, I remember we went, when she was in school, went to sell things. I was trying to tell her what to tell the neighbors to try to sell whatever it was she was selling. And she's like, Dad, you don't have to tell me. I've heard you do it many times. And then I knew I was in trouble when she came to me and wanted me to sponsor the things she was in. And I just looked at her and started shaking her head. And she goes, but that's what you tell me, or that's what you tell everybody. You know, it's like, now I've got to.
I taught you this.
Yeah.
I taught you this script.
I'm like, she's been listening to me. So it's just interesting how kids pick that up. And you're right. Even with your son, sales is in some areas is very different than the traditional way that you probably did it. As far as, he's in technology and there's just a lot of different process there. However, it still comes back to scripts and things like that. And so that's super interesting.
Long, short, but effective is the key.
Yeah.
The way I won the Krispy Kreme citywide contest at 10, I just like to say that, was my father. You've seen a box of Krispy Kreme donuts, the clear thing on the top and red, green, white. My father said, and we're in the South, everybody has a screen door. He said, ring the doorbell or knock on the door, whatever, and step to the side where it opens, where they can't fully see you. They see your shoulder and they know you're there. They will open the screen door to get a clear view of you. Hand them the donuts and say, here are your Krispy Kremes. And almost everyone said, thank you. How much do I owe you? And whatever it was, $3 or whatever. I gave them the figure and they ran back in the house, got the money and came back and gave it to me. That was it. Stay out of view. Here's your Krispy Kremes, which is a food group in the South. I mean, I'd give up vegetables before and vitamins before I gave up Krispy Kremes. And so he didn't say scripting. He was just teaching me common sense. Here's how you do it. And I'm sure somebody said I can't eat them or I'm a diabetic or something, but I really cannot consciously remember anyone opening that screen door and not giving me $3 moments later. Just sale after sale after sale after sale. My biggest aggravating thing about it was having to go back to the house to get more donuts.
It was hard work, right? Turned into a major
going back
job.
and forth was hard.
What if you were visiting with somebody, and we covered a lot of things, but if you're visiting with a new startup person that's getting into sales, and you've talked about scripts. If they don't have any, like they're in a position, they don't really have any, they're maybe in a small company, there's not a large sales staff. How do you recommend they go about developing that?
Get around. I have several cute answers, like hire Ben Gay. He writes scripts that
buy your book.
Buy the book, etc. But get around someone who is honestly succeeding. It's easy to get around. In Holiday Magic, when I joined in Atlanta, most of the people there were former Arthur Murray dance instructors. And no insult to a current Arthur Murray dance instructor. They're no longer allowed to sell an 80-year-old lady 4 lifetime memberships. But back in those days, I was in with a group of sharp skin suit hustlers with the leased Lincoln that they had to hide around the back of the building so it didn't get towed away during the opportunity meet. Through that, I told my father about it. I said, maybe in the wrong business here. These aren't the people hanging out at East Lake Country Club. Let me put it that way. He says, Ben, find the one who is a person of class, quality, and substance. That's where I got that phrase. And nail yourself to his side, his or her side, and do what they're doing. Honesty. And one of the people who I did that with is now in his 90s, a dear friend, Merle Frazier. He was honest as the day is long, had been to seminary. He was going to be a minister, but he wanted to make more money than that paid. But just a class guy. And I followed him around. I had to keep enough distance where I wasn't aggravating.
Right.
You know, it's like you go into a restaurant and he or she comes over the table, followed a foot away by somebody else who's shadowing them so they can learn how to wait on tables. I try not to be quite that obvious, but Merle Frazier, I watched. And then Jimmy Rucker, who was just my running buddy, what we had in common was drinking beer and trying to pick up girls. We got beer down, we nailed that. But picking up girls, we weren't real good at. Jimmy was a natural, probably the best salesperson I've ever worked with. We could argue Ross Perot or some superstar.
Right.
But of the ones I worked with, and I worked with some of the heavyweights in the business, Jimmy was the best ever. So for a while, he was just my wingman. And then he started closing deals and closing more deals. And we didn't know about closing ratios back then, but his was probably higher than 86%. And so I started learning from him. And in the back of the Closers Part 2, there's a chapter called Sales Infiltration. It runs about 40 pages. It is the best thing ever written about selling. And I say that humbly, having written it on a legal pad. But it was inspired writing. I mean, I can remember looking down at my hand, wondering what it was doing because it was sort of controlling itself. But it had clicked. What Rucker was doing but couldn't explain to you, what Zig Ziglar was doing but couldn't explain to you. They were all, I coined the term, sales infiltrators. And when I was at my best, that's what I was. So we talk about, the 10 days to 5 minutes. If somebody wants to find out exactly what the master closer sales infiltrators do, if you read nothing else about selling in your career, get a hold of that chapter, Sales Infiltration. It finally explains it. It was like, oh, I can say, I sent it to Rucker and a copy of the book when it came out. And he says, Ben, this is what I was trying to tell you. So Rucker was a horrible sales trainer, great salesman, because his idea of training was, well, just do what I do.
But he didn't. But it was hard to pick up. Right, it wasn't enough. So, do you have more books and things in the works that you're writing, or is that piece of your career pretty much over?
No, I've done between ghostwriting. As I tell people in selling, you may have one of my books in your library and not know it. I've only been caught a couple of times. I have little catchphrases I like to drop in, and occasionally I'll get a phone call. Did you write so-and-so book? And I said, well, as you know, as a ghostwriter, I couldn't tell you whether I did or didn't. That's a vow of secrecy.
Right.
Yeah, but let me read you 2 or 3 sentences. And I go, well, I understand why you called me. So under that program, including ones with my name on it, I've written 35 books.
Excellent.
6 of them are still very good sellers. A few of them I don't remember writing. I told them up one time, so I know what the number is, but other people had to remind me, well, you didn't mention these truths are self-evident. And I said, what's that? The first book you ever wrote. I said, oh, really? Must not, it didn't even impress me. Must not impress it.
Hey,
if you have a copy, you're a cult of one.
Right.
So we're always in process. And what I'm doing now is sort of like chicken soup for the soul. Co-writing. I'll write the forward, edit it and co-write it with people who know their specialty.
Right.
I know the greatest home improvement salesman in the world, and I'm trying to get him to write a book on home improvement.
Right.
He's forgotten more about home improvement than I know, but I've trained all of his salespeople.
Right. Excellent. So
here's one I love. Remember
Go
Paul
ahead.
Myers, Success Motivation Institute, SMI?
Yes.
Waco. Okay. They sold, among other things, motivational stuff and so on.
Right.
They sold sales training programs. And they hired me and bought my material to teach their people how to sell their SMI programs. I always found that sort of amusing.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. So how can listeners find your books and your material? And if they want to follow you, I assume you're on some social media platforms and things as well.
Well, I do a lot of podcasts and so on. And I have a piece of cardboard with typed out where they go, but if I could just tell you where
do
they
that.
go.
And we'll put it out on ours as well, but I'd like for you to verbalize it.
There's a website that sells my books at discounted pricing with free shipping.
Okay.
Less than I do, for less than I would do. So I'll send you there. And you can say, well, how is that possible? Well, the bookstore is called Ronzoni Books, and Gigi's maiden name is Ronzoni. And the reason she's able to do it is she steals from my warehouse. And then when she sells it, she slips it into our shipping department. So she has no product costs and no shipping costs. She's therefore able to undercut us. If you would, therefore, I'm married to an embezzler. That's what I'm really trying to tell you. If they would like to know where to go for that, go to stores, stores.ebay.com/Ronzoni Books, all one word. Ronzoni is RONZONE Books, BOOKS. Guaranteed lowest pricing, free shipping. And they're still brought to me, talk about audacity, they're still brought to me to sign and date.
So that's interesting. You've kind of got the fox in the hen house, don't you?
Yeah, sort of.
Well,
but
Ben,
she's pretty.
That's
that's
thing,
good.
right?
That's good. It's a two-way street. Relationships take some give and take. So
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for joining us on Mindset Growth Podcast, Ben. It was really been enjoyable listening to you. I'm sure we've not even scratched the surface of all the things you've done and what you've accomplished, but hopefully the goal for Mindset Growth Podcast is to get people maybe challenge them to think differently. And I love to share with people that have overcame and done something maybe almost bigger than themselves, for sure, at early life. And that's what resonated when Randy recommended you be on our podcast. And when we researched that, is just what you've accomplished. And I hope this inspires other young folks that are listening to this, or salespeople, to maybe buy your materials and really understand how that process and the value of scripts. So I really want to thank you, Ben, for joining us on Mindset Growth Podcast.
My pleasure and honor. Anytime I can be of assistance, just shoot me an email or give me a phone call and we'll do it. And to your listeners, jump in the pool. It is wonderful. It's a life you can't imagine if you do it well.
That's right. It's a better way. Thank you, Ben, and have a great day.